Thanks, everybody. I'm Silvia Solaun, the Executive Director of New Jersey Forest Watch. And we're going to talk a little bit about Sparta Mountain. You see on my slide, I'm calling it a case study. And really, our take-home message is that we hope all of you on this call today understand that our public lands, especially we New Jersey taxpayers, pay for many of these lands. They are green acres encumbered in many cases, that they deserve to be held to the highest standard. And we do need high standards because we all participated in paying for them. And right now that has not been going on. And that is why we really need to be advocates for our public lands. With that being said, if you don't know where Sparta Mountain is, the little red star that I have on the map shows you where approximately we're in the northwest part of the state. And as Emil had showed you before, in the Highlands region, there is a lot of forest cover, which we love about New Jersey. And now diving into a little bit specifically, where is Sparta Mountain and why it's so important? As Emil mentioned in his presentation, in New Jersey, there are these natural heritage priority sites that were deemed in the 80s of such high ecological value that they got this state designation. And so the pink areas are the areas you see here on the Sparta Mountain Wildlife Management Area that are part of this natural heritage priority site. And so in these areas, you find rare plant communities, you find wildflowers growing, the lichen and mycorrhizal communities are amazing. And what's interesting is that Sparta Mountain is a high conservation value forest in the Highlands. Originally, when the plan or FSP Forest Stewardship Plan was written for Sparta Mountain, it had only 82 approximately rare, threatened, and endangered species. But because of the support of the Highlands Coalition, the Natural Heritage Community, the plant surveys were done, not in the whole entire 3,461 acres, but in these small parcels of area that we were able to get additional plant studies, 40 more rare, threatened, and endangered species were actually found. And so you'll see now in much of the documentation, we talk about having over 130 rare, threatened, endangered, and special concern species that are present on Sparta Mountain today. Additionally, there's a lot of ecological resource value on Sparta Mountain. You'll see these are delineated in the vernal pool areas. The Highlands Council mapping of this area dictates that there's about 30 of these vernal pools on Sparta Mountain. And those are areas we're going to talk a little bit more specifically when I showed you some of the damage that's happened with the logging equipment. And so we feel when we talk about high standards, we talk that in the DEP regs, as well as in other regulations, the current 300-foot buffers are not adequate. Bare minimum practice is what we kind of call them, even though they're called best management practices. Those are not sufficient. In fact, in the Highlands Act, the recommendation is for 1,000-foot buffers. And this is something that our group and many others in the field of ecology agree that these vernal pools, which are, for those of you who might not know, they are ephemeral type bodies of water. They remain, they're like these little ponds or pools where amphibians and other amphibian-like species call home, and they play an integral part in climate change, as well as, again, recognizing the whole ecological resource value of our public lands. Now, when we look at the acreage that's already been logged on Sparta Mountain, it's unbelievable to see that if we include this year's acreage, which, by the way, is entirely in a natural heritage priority site, and it's also on a frequented hiked trail called Monument Trail on Sparta Mountain. Many of us feel as though this is egregious. We should not be logging our natural heritage priority sites. And for those of you who haven't seen this particular part of Sparta Mountain, it is beautiful. It is south of the Edison Bog area. But to note, there's about 99 acres that have been logged on Sparta Mountain. Again, if we include that treatment that's scheduled for this year. And when we look at the number of football fields, just to kind of give you an idea for those of you who are football fans and are looking forward to Super Bowl, it's the equivalent of 75.4 football fields. And that is egregious, we feel, and many others do in the community. And the rights of way, which are typically where you see early successional habitat on Sparta Mountain, is about 140. So total, when you're looking at early successional habitat, you have about 215 acres. And then this side comment here, you'll see, I'm going to show you another picture. All of the pink areas are the areas that have been logged on Sparta Mountain with their corresponding dates. And you'll see this is where that stand 9 is for, it's actually earmarked for this year, this winter, and that is all in a natural heritage priority site. When you see most of the forest stewardship plans that are written, they all talk about board feet. And so we did some calculations, and if you take the 99 acres that have already been logged and soon to be logged on Sparta Mountain, you see that it equivalates to 2,607,482 board feet. That is taxpayer natural resources coming out of our public lands. And so it's really sad that our public areas are being not only earmarked for logging, but the commodity that it's being viewed as. And why is that important? Well, the benefits of intact forests are often underestimated. Leslie talked a little bit about carbon sequestration, and yes, older trees store more carbon than young trees. Additionally, our intact forests help clear our air and filter our water. In fact, most of you probably don't know, but when you have this filtration system, it actually reduces the cost of water treatment. And since 85% of our drinking water comes from our Highlands and Pinelands forests, New Jersey actually has the 4th lowest cost of water treatment in the country. Isn't that amazing? When have you thought of New Jersey having anything low, right? We pay the highest property taxes, so we should get some benefit back in our intact forests. Additionally, intact forests help to mitigate climate change by regulating temperature, humidity, and drought. They help prevent floods, erosion, stormwater runoff, and siltation. Intact unmanaged forests have more biodiversity than managed forests, and this has been documented by many groups such as the Old Growth Forest Network. They also help prevent invasive species from taking over the forest. They provide shelter for trout producing streams and amphibians. And with COVID, let's be real, all of us have really felt this reconnection that we need to go to our public lands and public areas to reconnect to nature, and we all deserve that, and we need to have it free of being logged. And so I wanted to review, because the claims to justify logging are really in some cases very convincing, and the spin is just amazing. So I just put together this chart to kind of go over some of the major claims that you'll see out there. The first one being young forests maximize sequestration and biodiversity, and that thinning will help carbon storage and sequestration. Well, that is not true, and science-based facts tell us this. We all know the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, has said mature, intact, unmanaged forests maximize carbon storage and sequestration, along with biodiversity. We need to protect our forests, and young trees may grow fast, but take decades to replace the carbon sequestered in old trees. I have another source here that just confirms that. Forests naturally thin, as you saw in Leslie's presentation, so we don't need to log them. The second claim that you may hear is that New Jersey needs more edges, or that we need these open areas for biodiversity. Well, as Leslie also showed, New Jersey has thousands of acres of rights of way. And we also have post-ag lands, as Emil mentioned. Many of these areas already provide early successional habitat. We have open areas that attract deer and invasives, and Jay is going to talk more about that. Forest interior dependent birds are at the greatest risk. We have wind, lightning, and insects. The emerald ash borer, for example, is already creating openings in our forests. So there's really no need to log our forests, especially our mature forests. Lastly, you may hear a claim that there's imperiled species such as the golden winged warbler or other early successional species. Creating habitat, again, when we look at the science, for a single species does not justify cutting hundreds of maturing forests that it's needed to protect the many of the species that are required and need an intact contiguous forest canopy. These include species like the red-shouldered hawk, which is state endangered, and our barred owls, both present on Sparta Mountain, which is state threatened. And due to climate change, this is an important fact I want all of you on this call to understand, that many of these early successional species, like the golden winged warbler, their habitat is actually drifting more northward to states like Minnesota and New Hampshire. So cutting mature trees and forest in New Jersey isn't going to bring back the golden winged warbler, nor many other early successional species. Now I want to shift a little bit. This is also a downside that many of you may not be exposed to or be aware of. But when you bring in commercial logging equipment, severe rutting happens. And whereas this is not considered, quote, construction, it is definitely destructive and it's degrading our public lands. These three pictures here show you the, first of all, the equipment that's being used is much larger than the access road. The middle one shows some of the huge ruts, and in many cases on the road, these have been 2 feet or more. And the very size and weight of the equipment is causing irreparable soil disturbance and displacement. Furthermore, as we dive into the negatives of bringing commercial equipment in the downsides of logging and the degradation of our public lands, the equipment, as I mentioned, is, this is like a track here. It causes all of the soil to the subsoil to come to the surface. So now the pH of the soil has changed. The middle photograph I'm showing you here is an 18-wheeler that arrived on Sparta Mountain to get the timber that's stacked here. And you should all know that this was a 18-wheeler from Canada. So another thing you need to think about, do you as a New Jersey taxpayer want to pay for public lands to have those resources then sold so that private entities can make money and that Canada can get our New Jersey woods? I hope you're home or you're in your office saying no. Over here on the right, you'll see that the ruts were so large. This person laid in the rut and has about 2 feet above it. Furthermore, when we look at some of the extreme rutting on the left, this shows you a harvest that was done in 2019 on Sparta Mountain. This is the Google image of what it looks like from a satellite. Now, the access point was supposed to be from the right of way. Okay, just to give you an idea here with my mouse. To the far right, it shows what happened was the logging equipment got stuck and there's no matting that's ever used. And so the contractor tried to go this way, got stuck, and then tried to make another road, went in the middle, and then he ended up going around and creating. So when you add that all together, there were 3 access points now. Now, part of these forest stewardship plans is that no new roads are supposed to be created. Well, this seems to be an ongoing issue. There's no oversight. These plans may, they say one thing and on the ground, all this damage happens. And we need our public lands to be held to higher standards. The other aspect to this is that many times you might hear that all of New Jersey's forests are even aged or that we're all middle aged. Ironically, when they do these cuts, this was a clear cut on stand 18, all of the trees were cut in this area. So now you've hence created an even aged forest. And so there's a lot that's unfortunately here, and it shows the irreparable harm that's occurring. Here in the ruts of this access point on stand 8, you see there was about 2 feet of soil displacement and pooling of water on the access road. Why is that important? Is that there's vernal pools. Remember that map I showed you with all of the 30 vernal pools on Sparta Mountain? Spotted salamander and wood frog eggs were found in this 8-inch pool of water because they never made it to their nearby vernal pool. So when we look at forestry and look at our public lands deserve to be held to the highest standard. And we all need to be advocates for that, because these salamanders and wood frogs never had a chance to speak for themselves. And why are they important? Well, this is interesting. And looking at this research, amphibians play an important role in sequestering carbon in the soil. All of the salamanders I show on this slide all came from Sparta Mountain. So you have here a spotted salamander, which is a special concern here in New Jersey. This is a marbled salamander. Aren't they amazing? And what's interesting is salamanders eat insects and invertebrate, and typically they eat like the leaf, leaf cutting, insects. And so they're key species in transferring carbon and methane into the soil. So instead of it being released into the atmosphere, it stays in the soil. So they're really, you want to think of salamanders as almost like climate hero. This science that was done by Semelich tells you that one salamander sequesters 178 pounds of carbon per acre per rainy season. Isn't that amazing? Density in this particular forest that was studied, it was 12,500 woodland salamanders per acre. And so when you do the math and kind of play around, if Sparta Mountain is 3,461 acres, that equates to 3.8 million tons of carbon that can be stored in the soil just by making sure we keep our salamander and our vernal pools and all of the habitat associated with this important player in climate, away from having logging and degradation of their habitat. So we need protections for our salamanders and vernal pools. And with that, this is a picture or 2 pictures of another Green Acres area called Roaring Rock, where a sensitive trout producing stream was negatively impacted. I know that Elliot talked a little bit about this, but as you can see here, the log was actually, it's so close to that trout producing stream. Additionally, there's some siltation that's happening here. And so these sensitive, fragile ecosystems have been negatively impacted, and this should not be occurring, but it is. And this is now leading me to, not only do we want to be advocates for that, but how does it impact our water? And as you all know already by now, that in our Highlands and Pinelands forests provide us the drinking water to more than 85% of the state. States like New York, very early on, chose to protect its forests instead of spending $6 to $8 billion in water treatment. That's in this graph here by the World Bank. And that the Trust for Public Land did a study and found that for every 10% increase in forest cover, water treatment decreased by 20%. So think about that. So if we can increase our forest cover and protect it, we will keep that protection for our water treatment cost in decreasing it. So lastly, when we think about what our legislative principles should be for our New Jersey public forest, I hope you've heard me loud and clear that we need to prioritize carbon storage and sequestration in trees and soil as the most important goal. We need to ban all commercial extraction of timber. Remember, these are your resources. We paid for Green Acres, in particular, in many cases, for taxes. And instead, we should be promoting ecological restoration. We need to leave intact, unfragmented forests as our best solution for climate defense. The forestry exemption should not apply to public lands in the Highlands. We should be applying any type of the highest standard for buffers, for vernal pools, C1 streams. No more BMPs that were set up from 1995. They're antiquated and old. In fact, I think I mentioned this before. The acronym is best management practice, but in our experience and in others, we call them the bare minimum practice. So they are not acceptable in public lands ecological values. Maximize water purification, minimize stormwater runoff, and mitigate drought. Lastly, we'd like to provide financial incentives for ecological restoration, which includes proforestation, afforestation, and reforestation. Thank you. Appreciate all. I will just show we do have sources for many of our slides, and I know Zach will be able to share that with many of you if you're interested. Thank you.